This is a short video to talk about a new addition to my electronics laboratory and studio that I've covered in a separate YouTube video. I probably briefly mentioned in there before that as part of my recording studio, I've got a setup to do CDs and DVDs in some quantity, and I have equipment to help me do that. And in another video, actually two videos I think, I've got one on the Primera Bravo 2 Autoprinter that I used for many years, and that was until the ink manufacturer stopped making ink cartridges, and I replaced it about 2 years ago with a model that had replaced the Bravo 2 Autoprinter, and that was the Primera 4100. And it was already, I think, about 6 years old. That model was about 6 years old at the time I bought it, and my understanding is that Lexmark, who was the maker of the print engine inside the Primera product, got sold to another company, and that company decided they weren't going to make the special Lexmark ink cartridge system that the Primera 4100 used any longer. Possibly it was something that wasn't widely used outside of the Primera product. I don't know that, it's just my guess. Anyway, so I was informed that in the not too distant future the ink supplies could start getting a bit scarce for the 4100, and I decided to use part of my tax refund this year in 2018, actually from the 2017 taxes, but received in 2018, to buy a replacement that would hopefully have some longevity to it. And Primera's current product is the 4200, which is shown here. And I'll show it from some other angles. It's externally identical to the 4100, and the software is exactly the same, but it uses a completely different print engine, designed in-house by Primera, they say, and using, I forget the name, but it's a Japanese company, and they make a lot of print engines according to the internet for other companies, and the ink cartridge that's used in the 4200 is one that's been around for a while and is expected to be around for a long time. It doesn't have the high speed that the ink cartridge system that was used in the 4100 had. It could knock out a disc in just, I don't know, like 3 seconds or something. It was really fast. This one's more like you'd expect from a typical inkjet system. It has to make quite a few passes over the disc, and you'll see how long it takes in this video. The thing that the 4100 and now the 4200 has over the old Bravo 2 that I used for such a long time is that the robotic mechanism that picks and places the discs from bins into the printing mechanism and then into the completed discs bin is much, much faster than that on the Bravo 2, which I would have to walk away, you know, sometimes for a couple of hours while it printed a batch of discs. And with the 4100, there was no point in even walking away. It could knock out discs so fast that you might as well just stay there and wait for it to be done. This 4200 is not quite that fast, but it's still pretty fast. And hopefully the hopefully the ink supplies will stick around long enough to justify the purchase. Anyway, so since I've covered the other models in other videos, I just thought I would do kind of a follow-up video now for the 4200. So I'm going to let's see if I can get this in the picture here. So the main application for this disk publisher is what Primera calls PT Publisher. It's a software application. It supports, I believe, all of their models of disk printers. And the 4200 here is kind of like their Cadillac. It's the highest cost and highest capacity, highest speed model. They do make ones that are considerably less expensive. The list price on the 4200 is pushing $2,000. Street price is more like $1,400, $1,500, something like that. And because I had bought a 4100 so recently, they gave me a knockoff of a couple $100 in addition. Luckily I didn't have to change the software really. I just plugged in the printer and registered and off to the races. Anyway, so just a recap of the way the software works here. Because this is the plain 4100 and not the 41 something something, one of their different models, they have models that have not only the printer in them but also 1 or 2 disc burners, and you can also get models that will do Blu-ray. The regular models will do CDs and DVDs. I have no use for that because I have a disc maker's tower duplicator, a couple of them actually, which can do it much faster than these Primera products can do it. So I get the job much faster by using the tower duplicator and then the Primera product to do the printing than I would if I just left the Primera product to do everything. So anyway, everything is grayed out on here. There's applications for burning files for a computer where you're doing data, ones where you're creating audio CDs, copying discs, doing DVDs, just doing disk images, and there's even what is called advanced projects, and that's for scheduling data backups and ripping them to your hard drive. I have no idea why I would use this product for that, but since I don't have drives in this printer, it doesn't matter. The only one that's got an option on this one, since it recognizes I have a plain 4200, the only option is a print-only project, which is printing on discs without doing any burning. So I select that, and it says add a print file. Now there is also an application called Sure Thing, which is another Primera product, I believe. It certainly comes from Primera, and that is a disk image authoring application. I have it on another computer in my office, and I actually use MediaFace from Nito to design the basic image, and then I export it and bring it into Sure Thing to change it to the format that Primera recognizes, and then I save it to a SD card. I don't have this particular computer on Wi-Fi or wired Ethernet, and it's just easier for me right now just to throw it on a memory stick or a SD card, pop it in there, and up pops Explorer. I've got my file here in Sure Thing format. I have a folder on the drive for Primera projects. Get rid of my old files there, I don't need them. And just making sure I've got the file in my Primera folder. And then I can bring up PT Publisher again, and there's my file. It generates a preview, takes a couple seconds, and there's my image. And I need to make sure that my print settings are correct. I'm printing with 100% saturation. There's an outer margin of 1 millimeter and an inner diameter margin of 39 millimeters. That matches the CD blanks that I use, which are from MAM America or MAM-A, It's a premium disc supplier made in Colorado. Its measurements are 39 millimeters. Let's see if I can get it. Its measurements are 39 millimeters across here, and with a 1 millimeter margin on the outside. So that's the appropriate settings for these particular discs. And let's see, I go ahead here. So I've got my stack of discs here for a small batch I've got. When I open the cover, the head comes over automatically in case I want to access the ink cartridge. This is a single cartridge system. The old 4100 I had until a couple of weeks ago had this massive assembly here with multiple cartridges in it and a separate print head, which was great in theory, but I found it a mess to deal with, and I'm just as happy it's going away. This is a very simple, kind of old-fashioned print cartridge with all colors in one. But the real advantage of it is that it can be cleaned easily. If I let it sit too long and it gets plugged, this cartridge, you can actually just take it out and dip the bottom end of it in a shallow tray of water for a couple of minutes, take it off, touch it up with a paper towel, put it back in, and it's off to the races. The other one, if you looked at it sideways, it would just totally mess up the head. So this is much more robust. And this is the robot over here. This is a pick-and-place robot. Has, I believe, some sort of sensors in it. And also it's got the picking mechanism, and then of course it can go up and down. And this is the interesting thing about the Primera product. The robot can go up and down, but it can't go sideways. It's just there. And the print head, which is part of the print engine, actually has a docking mechanism on it, and it goes over and latches on to the robotic mechanism and then drags it around sideways whenever it needs to move the robot. And then when it doesn't need the robot anymore, it pushes it way off to the side and then detaches from it, and then the ink cartridge has the full width to run back and forth on its rail and do the actual printing. After which it goes over, grabs the robot again, moves the robot into position, and does what the robot needs to do. And that's where the old Bravo 2 that I had for so long, a real workhorse, was so slow. Every motor on it was just painstakingly slow. It went through a lot of wasted motion and just took forever. It was still easier than doing it by hand, but it was definitely slow. Now it's a little hard to see down here probably, but there's also a maintenance station here. You can see there where the cartridge can be parked to maintain it and so on. And this one, instead of blowing ink into an ink reservoir when you're doing head cleaning, it actually has you put a disc out in the tray, and then it purges onto the disc. The other thing this has is it's got a couple of trays, a left one and a right one. Each can hold 50 discs, so a total of 100 discs possible in here in one batch. And then there's a chute out the front, which in this situation I don't usually use. There's a metal bracket that clips onto here and holds in front here a 100 disc bin. So there's actually 3 bins, the left, the right, and the front bin. Right now I'm just using the left and the right. And you can designate one to be the source and one to be the destination. You could load both discs, or both bins here, up with discs and send everything out the chute when it's done. So there's different options. So I'm going to go ahead here and put my disc blanks in there. Now it goes over here, and the first thing is it does, it's going to be a little hard to see here because the lighting is not good. After a few seconds, it goes over here and checks to see how many discs are in the left and the right bins. and then it comes over here and gives you a report. There's no discs in the left bin and 10 discs in the right bin. And then of course there's ink status from the cartridge. Now this system does use a ink cartridge verification system. There's some sort of a chip or a code on top of the cartridge, and there's appears to be a reader inside the lid of the cartridge holder. With the old Bravo 2 I had, they just used regular generic Lexmark cartridges, or you could get the Primera branded ones. And the Primera ones added a barcode, which the regular Lexmark one didn't have. And then they actually scanned that with the Primera mechanism to see if the barcode was there, and it could tell if it was a Primera cartridge or not. And actually the prices on the Primera ones were quite reasonable and in line with the Lexmark cartridges, but a lot of times if I was doing a big batch on a weekend or something, I might actually run out of the Primera ink and need to get more, and there wasn't any Primera stores, so I'd go out to the Office Max and get the Lexmark cartridges, and I would just peel the barcode off the Primera one and stick it on the Lexmark one, and didn't know the difference. With this one, I don't know if there's any way to fake it out. I haven't tried that yet, but anyway, so with the settings here, I go ahead and click this. It advances to the final stage. I tell it I want to make one disc as a trial, just to make sure everything's printing okay. And I click go. Picks up a disc, moves it onto the tray, retracts the tray, goes over, gets rid of the robot. Now the cartridge is loose. I believe at this point it's checking cartridge validity, and then it gets ready to print, and now it's printing. The blue LEDs inside this thing really are, in my opinion, very undesirable. It kind of looks cool, but a lot of times I want to check the status of the printing as it's doing a batch to make sure nothing weird's going on. And with the blue LEDs, it really skews the color spectrum so much that in many cases you can't even tell if it printed anything, or if it's running out of one color of ink or something, until it finishes the whole batch, because opening the lid aborts the process. That was another thing I liked about my Bravo 2 that these later models don't have, is you could, unless the robot was being used, you could open the lid during the printing process and inspect and supervise the work. Okay, so now it's moved the disc into the left bin, and it'll come over here and say job completed successfully, one disc complete, one disc is good, no bad discs, and I can clear that out. And now the printer, I think in just about any second here. Oh, it already did it. It's already logged that there's one disc in the left bin and now 9 discs in the right bin. So I'm going to open the printer. It gets everything out of the way, except inexplicably, and this I think is a programming issue, it should get the head out of the way too, but it leaves it in the way. So when you're lifting up the discs, you hit the head unless you tip them. And I just realized it was doing that. Like right now, I didn't notice it when I was doing a few early tests with this model. You can actually, you know, take them out like this, but it kind of seems like it would be good to get the head out of the way. Anyway, so this is a real simple artwork. It's got kind of a blue parchment finish. Not a very elaborate artwork for this demonstration, but it definitely did it okay. There's no anomalies in the printing. So I'm going to put the Left bin back in place. Close the lid. It'll go over here, and if I give it a moment, it should run through the routine again to see if I changed anything. I don't know why it doesn't do this right away, but there it goes. After a few seconds, it'll check the right bin, check the left bin, and it'll report now that there's 0 discs in the left and 9 discs in the right. I have to go back to the previous step. I still have the same image, and I'm going to say I want to do 9 more like that because I had 9 more discs. So I'm going to do a test here. It's 6:25 on my watch. See, if this was the 4100 that I had, it would have already finished printing that disc. It had a very wide print head. I think it was about 1 inch wide, and it only took, I don't know, like 3 or 4 passes of the disc, not very many, to print the whole surface. So this one has what you'd be more used to from a regular consumer grade print head on it that just prints a little swath each time it goes back, so it definitely takes longer to print. That's not a big deal. Goes and gets the robot, comes over, gets the disc, drops it off, goes over, picks the next disc. The tray has extended, retracts, it's going to drop off the robot. Whatever it does for a few seconds on the left side before repeating. While it's doing that, I'm going to look at the rest of the printer. So there's the label. It has a couple of buttons on the top, the so-called power button on the right and the ink button on the left, each of which has a blue LED under it, and there's a whole pattern of LEDs and flashes and so on. And I've peeled the stickers off my 4100 here. I'm going to make new ones, but it's sort of a short form interpretation of the LEDs. I think it's slightly different for this 4200. I need to probably update what it says here, but if both external LEDs were on steady, it meant that the printer is ready and waiting to load a CD or a DVD. If both alternately blinked back and forth, that meant it was waiting for you to put in a cartridge, or the lid is open. If a light flashes rapidly, then goes solid, it means the tray stalled or the head mechanism stalled. I think that means the print head carriage, and you have to push the ink button to reset it. If the internal LED slowly dims, it means the ink has got a low level, and if the internal LED flashes, it means that there's a missing ink cartridge. That doesn't apply to this because it only has one cartridge. So that's part of what I'm going to have to update. Or it would say, you know, you told it to print X number of CDs and there aren't that many there, it's out of CDs. That's probably still going to be the same code for that. Or it has mispicked a CD, there's some sort of robot error. So I'm going to make a new label like that, updated for this model. And I also have the brands of discs I use. I normally use only Tayo Yuden DVDs, or, depending on my customer, MAM-A DVD minus or plus. These days it's pretty much just gone over to minus. I rarely use the plus anymore. And I also do CDR, which is what I'm printing on now, also from MAM-A. And each of them has a slightly different set of parameters. This is in tenths of a millimeter. So the internal ID, for example, on the software I had 39, and here it's represented as 390. And then the 10 represents 1 millimeter, which is the margin around the outside of the disc. So those are all 10. But those are the settings for each brand and type of disc I normally use to remind me what to enter into the PT Publisher software. And this computer here is a Dell, real low-end one. I think the computer only costs $300. It's got only two purposes, and it's appeared in another one of my videos. It has two purposes here. One is to talk to this Primera printer, and the other one is to act as the terminal for my Altair vintage personal computer, which the Primera sits on top of. And the back of the printer, it's AC powered. It doesn't use a wall wart. There's a power switch on there, and there's a fan on the back, and then it's got one of these newer types of USB that has additional pins in it. Very high speed USB. I don't know exactly what that type is called, but that's I believe allowing this to work with only the USB to communicate. The previous version, the 4100, I believe that if you had the burners installed in it, it also required an Ethernet connection to send the disk image over, the data in other words, while the USB was just used for the printing and possibly for control of the robot. On here I believe it's done exclusively with that special USB connection on all models. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that's the case. We're making progress here. And my battery ran out in the middle of the batch, so I missed some of the disk printing while I went to get a new battery. That's the camera battery that I'm talking about. I think we're down to maybe the last couple of discs. I can look at the running tally here. It's saying 6 and 3 at this point. The reason I have a dedicated printer here really isn't for the Altair, it's for the Primera, because the robot is apparently driven from the driver in the computer instead of with a dedicated processor. At least that's what I've gathered over the years of my ownership of this series of printers. It's very sensitive to whether your computer is busy or not, and for example, I found that with my Bravo 2 and the 4100, if the computer was printing to any other printer while it was also printing to this Primera product, it would jazz up the way the robot worked. If the computer had a lot of services running in the background, it could jazz up the way the robot or the printer worked. And if you had a long USB cable, it could jazz up the way the robot or the printer worked. So I'm gathering that the driver for the printer in the computer is apparently responsible for all the motions, at least the robotic motions, and apparently it's timing critical, and if you have any latency in the response to requests and commands and things like that, that the robot apparently needs, and those could be due to retries due to errors on a long cable, or just because your computer is too busy or has too many things going on in the background, or because it's currently spooling data to another printer at the same time, you just can't do it. So the best solution is to have a very lightly loaded, or in my case, dedicated computer to running this particular printer. So it finished the job. It says 9 complete discs, 9 of them are good, no rejects. And it's showing 9 discs in the left tray and 0 discs in the right tray. And they all came out just fine. Now that the printer is done, I'm going to pop the ink cartridge out to show what that looks like. It's a high yield color cartridge, everything in one. That's what the head looks like. The electrical connections. It's a fairly large cartridge. Looks like it should have a decent capacity. Maybe there's a chip inside the cartridge that is connected in the same way as the cartridge elements itself. Just guessing here. But anyway, I'm pretty sure it is checking one way or another. So that's an overview of the Primera 4200. Let's see, what else can I say about it. They do recommend that you leave it turned on all the time. It keeps those LEDs going, but none of the motors are running, and I don't think it takes very much power. And if you just let it sit for weeks, you'll hear it every once in a while wake up and move the head around, and I think it's going and doing a quick ink purge or something. Or maybe running it over a wiper. Anyway, it's doing something to at least minimize the amount of blockage you get on a cartridge during periods of disuse. And that's been true of the 4100, and Primera says the 4200 as well. It was not something that the Bravo 2 had. That guy would just sit there indefinitely with taking no action at all. But it was so easy to clean the cartridge if it did plug that it wasn't really an issue. Anyway, so hope you found this interesting.